All right, now let's take a look at how to implement this command pattern on one of our repos. So I have pulled over from module 3 the task repo we were using when we were dealing with our task object. And basically all this repo has is two methods, the get method and the save method. And those will do things for me as we go. But what we want to do is we want to eliminate the need to know it's got a get method and a save method and work that a little bit differently. So what we're going to do is we're going to add to this repo an execute method. And this execute method is going to take the name of a method that we want to execute. And I don't care what it is, it could be anything. And then it's going to run some stuff. So what our repo.execute is going to do is it's going to actually call the method for us. So if repo subname exists, then we're going to call that with the dot apply. Now, if you've been watching the whole thing, you'll see I'm using call sometimes and apply sometimes, and there's a reason for that. I like to use dot call, and I can pass in the context, but dot apply allows me to just pass in an array of parameters. Dot call, you have to list out each parameter individually. Dot apply lets me pass in the array of arguments right here in the second parameter of dot apply. So that's why sometimes I'm using dot call and sometimes I'm using dot apply. It depends on the context of what we're doing. Speaking of which, I need an array. And so that's what we're going to put right here is the same thing I think we've done this once before. Var args equals the slice off of array. And I've spelled it out, array.prototype, just so it's obvious. You can just do that. Array.slice.call arguments. I'm just being more explicit. And I'm cutting off the first one because we already are using that one somewhere else. Now, if that exists, I'm going to call it. And if it doesn't, I'm not going to call it. And then we're just good. Otherwise, I'm going to return false. So the way I deal with this is I call repo.execute in order to execute a method on that repo. And in this case, let's do save. And I can pass in a task object that I want to save to the database. Let's just pass in something, a task with an ID, a name, and whether or not it's completed. And that for right now will be the task that we're going to work with. Now, when I run this, you'll see we get saving task 1 to the database. So the way the command pattern works is I just pass in as a parameter the method I want to call and then the object that I want to call it on. Now, this seems to be a little bit more complicated, so let's build this out a little bit so you start to see why we might use the command pattern. We'll start by adding an actual repo of tasks. And so we'll just do this. We'll say tasks. And that's going to equal an empty object. And we'll do commands. And that's going to be an array of all of the commands that are executed on this repo. Now, when I execute save, let's actually save to my repo what we're saving. So let's do repo.tasks sub task.id is going to be equal to the task that gets passed in. Well, it'll just be our repo that we're going to use for right now. We're just going to save every task under its task ID back into our repo. Now that we have that, let's come down here into the execute and let's drop a push in here. So now repo.commands.push, we're going to push the name of the command and whatever it is we passed in. So that way we're going to end up with a list of commands like save and get and all of those and the object that was passed in. Now for this one, we're just going to kind of keep it simple. Remember, args is going to pass us an array, and I just want the object that's passed in. So we're going to take the first one, arg sub 0, and drop it in there so that we have our object. Okay, now when I run this, I'm going to have a list of commands and a list of objects. Let's build this out just a little bit more. And instead of just one, let's run 4. So now I've got 4 executes creating 4 tasks. And just down at the bottom, we'll do a console.log, and we'll add in our repo.tasks. Now let's run this again, and you'll see we have 4 tasks now in our database, our repository, task 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the full task. Now here's the beauty of the command pattern. I have in my commands object, my commands array, all of the things that have been done to this repo since it was created. And if something catastrophic were to happen, like I don't have a database connection or an error happen, I actually have the ability to rerun those commands again in order to make this work. So let's play with that just a little bit so I can show you what that looks like. We're going to create a new method on our repo called replay. And that's going to be a function. And what replay is going to do is run over our commands and re-execute them. Now there's one issue with this in that I'm executing, and in my execute I'm logging it in my repo command. So let's actually create a new method called repo.execute_no_log, which is basically repo just without this one commands.push. So we're executing it, but we're not logging it because we don't want to create an infinite loop here. All right, so now what's going to happen, recap real quick, we created a replay function that is basically just going to loop over the commands and rerun them. And we're going to call execute no log in order to make this work. Now let's come down the bottom and let's try this out. So I'm going to log my tasks. Then I'm going to go repo.tasks equals empty. That's bad. I just deleted everything in my repository. And I'll prove that to you by logging this out again. Now don't worry, I can do that because now I can do repo.replay. And all that's going to do is rerun all of the commands that were executed against my repo. And I'm going to run it one more time. I'll run my logging one more time, and you can see that this worked. So let's try this one more time. Let's run this, and what you're going to see is you're going to see the full list of tasks, you'll see nothing, and then you'll see the replay of tasks. So look at this. Check this out. You've got saving 4 tasks. There's the 4 tasks. Then you've got nothing. Then we ran our repo.replay, and look, we've got our saving 4 tasks again, and our 4 tasks are back in our repository. So what this command pattern allows me to do is log all of the commands that are executed against my object and then rerun them as necessary. And actually another thing we could do if we wanted to take the time is I could do a get on my task. So if I save a task, I could do a get first just in my save and store the old version in my command. And then I could do a rollback that would then just save the old version. There's all kinds of things you can do with this command pattern when you start treating your commands as a full-blown object.